Commander Elena Rodriguez stood before the massive holographic display in the war room buried 3 kilometers beneath Geneva, watching crimson dots multiply across the three-dimensional star map like drops of blood spreading through water. Each dot represented a Zephyrian battle cruiser, and there were now over 3,000 of them arranged in perfect geometric formations just beyond the asteroid belt. A crimson constellation of death approaching humanity's final sanctuary. The war room hummed with tension. Dozens of Earth's finest military minds sat around the curved amphitheater, their faces bathed in the red glow of approaching doom. Coffee cups had grown cold hours ago, forgotten as everyone stared at the inexorable advance of humanity's executioners. "They're not even trying to hide," muttered General Harrison Webb, his weathered face deeply lined with exhaustion and fear. At 63, Webb had survived 3 previous alien incursions, but nothing like this. "It's like they want us to see them coming, like they're putting on a show." Webb was right. The Zephyrian formation was so precise, so perfectly arranged, that it resembled a mathematical theorem written in starship hulls. Every vessel maintained exact spacing, their energy signatures creating a harmonious symphony of power that their sensors could detect from billions of kilometers away. It was beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely deliberate. The Zephyrian Empire had been humanity's waking nightmare for the past 5 years. The first contact had come not through diplomatic channels or scientific discovery, but through the sudden silence of the Kepler 442 colony. 30,000 souls who simply stopped transmitting one day. When the rescue fleet arrived 3 months later, they found nothing but glass where New Sacramento had once stood, and a single message burned into the planet's surface in 17 different languages. "Submit or share this fate." Since then, the galaxy had watched in horror as world after world fell to the Empire's advance. The Zephyrians were tall, elegant insectoid beings with chitinous armor that gleamed like black mirrors and compound eyes that could perceive 17 different spectrums of light simultaneously. They moved with predatory grace, spoke in harmonious clicking patterns that sounded almost musical, and killed with the casual efficiency of a farmer harvesting wheat. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything in human space. Their ships could phase in and out of normal spacetime, their weapons could punch through neutronium armor like tissue paper, and their shields could absorb the full energy output of a star without showing strain. 47 star systems had learned these facts the hard way. 47 civilizations had tried to stand against the Empire's expansion. None had succeeded. "Intelligence reports indicate they'll reach Earth in 72 hours, Rodriguez said, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. She manipulated the hologram with practiced gestures, zooming in on the alien fleet until individual ships became visible, each one larger than humanity's biggest dreadnought, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a continent. "Our defensive satellites won't even scratch their hulls. The orbital platforms might buy us 30 minutes if we're lucky." Webb nodded grimly, his gray eyes reflecting a lifetime of military service. Earth's combined fleet consisted of barely 200 ships, most of them repurposed mining vessels and cargo haulers hastily fitted with weapons that had been cutting-edge 50 years ago. Against the Zephyrian Armada, they might as well be throwing stones at a nuclear missile. "Ma'am," interrupted Lieutenant Jackson from his communication station, his young voice cracking slightly with stress. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian flagship. They're requesting a parley." The war room fell silent except for the distant hum of life support systems. Rodriguez and Webb exchanged glances heavy with shared knowledge. The Zephyrians had never bothered with diplomacy before, not with any of the 47 worlds they had conquered. Their pattern was always the same. Arrive, demand immediate unconditional surrender, and when it was inevitably refused, demonstrate their power by reducing cities to radioactive glass until compliance was achieved. Why were they talking now? "Put it through," Rodriguez ordered, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her uniform. Whatever was coming, she would meet it as a representative of humanity with dignity and tact. The holographic display shifted, the star map dissolving to reveal the imposing figure of High General Kithara, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Assault Force. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its obsidian carapace catching and reflecting light in hypnotic patterns. Its compound eyes, each one the size of a human fist, fixed on Rodriguez with an intelligence that was utterly alien yet unmistakably predatory. When it moved, servos whined softly within its biomechanical armor, and its forearms gestured with mechanical precision. Most unsettling of all were the sounds it made. A rhythmic clicking of mandibles that Rodriguez had learned was their equivalent of laughter. The translation device, a miracle of xenolinguistics cobbled together from captured Zephyrian technology, rendered its voice in cold, mechanical tones that somehow made every word sound like a death sentence. "Humans of Earth," Kythera began, its voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely perceive. "Your pathetic species has lasted longer than most. This amuses us greatly. However, your borrowed time has ended. You will surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why 47 worlds now kneel before the Empire's glory." Rodriguez stepped forward, moving into the projection field so Kythera could see her clearly. She kept her spine straight despite the fear clawing at her chest like a living thing. "General Kythera, we've prepared a defensive strategy that I think might surprise you." The alien's compound eyes seemed to shimmer with something that might have been amusement or hunger. In the background, Rodriguez could hear other Zephyrian officers making the clicking sounds that passed for laughter among their species, a chorus of mechanical mirth that chilled her blood. "Your species never fails to entertain us, human female," Kythera replied, its mandibles spreading in what was unmistakably a predatory smile. "Very well. Share your strategy, so we might properly appreciate the futility of resistance before we demonstrate the price of defiance. We find that hope, when properly crushed, produces the most satisfying despair." Rodriguez activated her personal holographic display with a gesture that she hoped appeared more confident than she felt. The three-dimensional tactical formation that materialized before the assembled officers looked like the fevered dream of a madman. Human ships scattered seemingly at random throughout the inner solar system, with no discernible defensive perimeter, no strategic choke points, and no apparent coordination between vessel groups. Some ships were positioned near Jupiter's moons, others drifted in the asteroid belt, and still more hung in the void between Mars and Earth with no obvious purpose. The formation violated every principle of military doctrine that had been developed since humans first took to space. It looked less like a battle plan and more like the result of throwing 200 ship markers into the air and recording where they landed. Kythera's clicking intensified, the sound rippling through the Zephyrian bridge like mechanical laughter. Its compound eyes swept across the display with what could only be described as incredulous amusement. "This is your grand strategy, humans? Your ships are scattered like leaves in a cosmic wind, dispersed across millions of cubic kilometers with no tactical coherence whatsoever. Are you certain you wish to face the might of the Empire with such randomness?" Rodriguez felt the weight of every human life pressing down on her shoulders as she responded. "We call it the Dandelion Formation, General. Each ship operates independently, with complete autonomy once the engagement begins. No central command structure, no coordinated movements, no unified tactical doctrine." The alien general's mandibles spread wide in what was unmistakably mocking laughter, a sound like breaking glass mixed with static. Behind Kythera, the entire Zephyrian bridge erupted in their version of mirth. Dozens of officers producing a symphony of clicking that sounded like an army of insects celebrating a feast. The sound was so alien, so utterly contemptuous, that several human officers in the war room visibly flinched. "No command structure?" Kythera's voice carried undertones of disbelief mixed with sadistic pleasure. "Humans, you have just described military suicide in its purest form. Without coordination, without unity of purpose, without the binding discipline of command hierarchy, your ships will be destroyed piecemeal like insects caught in a web. We have studied your species for years through our conquest of your colonies. You excel at chaos and disorder, but warfare requires precision, unity, and absolute order." One of Kythera's subordinates stepped forward, a slightly smaller Zephyrian with silver markings across its carapace that indicated high rank. Its voice carried the same mechanical translation, but with an undertone of academic interest that was somehow more chilling than Kithara's open mockery. "General," the subordinate said, its compound eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. "With respect to honoring our human prisoners' final wishes before their inevitable demise, perhaps we should indeed study this dandelion formation for inclusion in our military academies. Future generations of Zephyrian warriors could learn valuable lessons from this perfect example of how not to conduct space warfare. It would serve as an excellent case study in the inherent chaos that leads lesser species to extinction." Kithara's entire posture shifted, its forearms gesturing in patterns that the translation system couldn't interpret. "An excellent suggestion, Commander Vextar. The Empire's war colleges would benefit greatly from such a demonstration of tactical incompetence." It turned back to Rodriguez, its eyes now holding something that resembled pity mixed with cruel anticipation. "Humans, we will grant you 6 standard hours to reconsider this strategy. When we begin our attack, we will document the destruction of each vessel for educational purposes. Your chaos will serve as an eternal lesson in the superiority of Zephyrian military doctrine and the folly of resisting the Empire's expansion." The transmission ended abruptly, but not before Rodriguez heard the clicking laughter echo throughout what sounded like the entire Zephyrian command ship. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of voices joining in mechanical mirth at humanity's apparent foolishness. General Webb turned to Rodriguez, his expression a mixture of grave concern and desperate hope. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the tactical table until his knuckles turned white. "Elena, are you absolutely certain about this plan? Because if you're wrong about their psychology, if you've miscalculated their response patterns." "If I'm wrong, we all die," Rodriguez replied with brutal honesty, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But Harrison, if we follow conventional tactics against their superior technology and overwhelming numbers, we die anyway, quickly, efficiently, and without any hope of taking even a single one of them with us. At least this way, we die on our own terms, fighting a battle they don't understand." She looked around the war room at the faces of humanity's finest military minds. Generals who had spent decades studying warfare, admirals who had commanded fleets in 3 different conflicts, strategists whose tactical innovations had been taught in academies across human space. Some looked skeptical, their training rebelling against everything the plan represented. Others appeared terrified, fully comprehending the magnitude of what they were attempting. But all of them had ultimately agreed to the plan, not because they believed it would work, but because it was the only strategy that wasn't guaranteed to result in total annihilation within the first 5 minutes of engagement. "Remember," Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying across the amphitheater with quiet intensity, "the Zephyrians have never encountered truly asymmetrical warfare conducted at this scale. They've conquered 47 worlds using the same doctrine every single time. Overwhelming technological superiority applied through perfect coordination and mathematical precision. Every species they've faced has tried to match their tactics, to meet order with order, precision with precision. And every species has been systematically destroyed," Webb pointed out, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "Exactly. Which means we're going to do something that no species in their conquest record has ever attempted." Rodriguez smiled grimly, the expression holding no warmth but considerable determination. "We're going to embrace the chaos they fear most, and turn our greatest weakness into our greatest strength." 6 hours later, the Zephyrian fleet began its inexorable approach to Earth, moving through space with the mechanical precision of a vast clockwork mechanism. High General Kithara stood in the center of the command bridge, its 4 arms clasped behind its back in a gesture of supreme confidence, watching the tactical display with what its subordinates had learned to recognize as eager anticipation. The bridge itself was a monument to Zephyrian military philosophy. Every surface polished to mirror brightness, every officer positioned exactly where doctrine demanded, every system operating in perfect harmony. The human ships remained scattered throughout the inner solar system in their bizarre formation, showing no signs of regrouping or establishing anything resembling defensive lines. If anything, their positioning had become even more chaotic. Some vessels had actually moved further apart, creating gaps in their formation that could accommodate entire Zephyrian battle groups. "General," Commander Vextar reported from its station, compound eyes reflecting the tactical display's glow. Our long-range sensors confirm the human fleet composition remains unchanged. 197 vessels total, mostly converted civilian craft hastily fitted with obsolete military hardware. Their largest vessel, what they call a dreadnought, is less than half the size of our smallest destroyer and appears to be constructed from mining equipment and cargo haulers welded together. Kithra's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. And they maintain this dandelion formation. Yes, General. If anything, they've become more scattered across a wider area of space. Analysis indicates some ships are actually moving away from Earth entirely, abandoning their homeworld before the battle has even begun. Our xenopsychology experts interpret this as mass desertion driven by primitive fear responses. Kithra allowed itself a moment of what humans might have called amusement. Cowardice and tactical incompetence combined. How refreshingly predictable these humans are, despite their reputation for unpredictability. The Zephyrian fleet continued its advance, maintaining the geometric perfection that had become their signature across 47 conquered worlds. Each ship knew its exact position down to the millimeter, its role in the coming battle down to the microsecond, and its place in the grand tactical doctrine that had never failed. They moved like a living organism composed of 3,000 individual cells, each one perfectly coordinated with the whole. As they crossed the orbit of Mars, the first anomaly appeared on their sensor networks, a subtle disturbance that initially registered as little more than background noise. "General," called out the sensor operator, its voice carrying a note of puzzlement. "We're detecting some unusual readings from the human vessels." Kithra's compound eyes swiveled toward the sensor station. "Define unusual, Operator Zexcol. Their energy signatures are fluctuating irregularly, sir. Inconsistently across the entire fleet. Each ship seems to be operating on different power cycles, different frequency modulations, different electromagnetic spectrums. It's creating significant sensor interference patterns that don't match any known technological standard." Kithra moved to examine the sensor data personally, its mechanical precision making no sound on the bridge's polished deck. The readings showed a chaotic soup of electromagnetic noise emanating from every human vessel, power signatures that spiked and faded seemingly at random, communication arrays that broadcast on frequencies that served no apparent purpose, and energy patterns that defied logical analysis. "Amateur hour," Kithra concluded with dismissive certainty. "Their ships aren't even properly calibrated to work together as a coordinated force. This confirms everything our intelligence reports suggested about human technological incompetence." But Commander Vextar, who had made a career of studying defeated species, looked troubled by the readings. Its silver markings seemed to dim as it processed the implications. "General, with respect, what if this electromagnetic interference is intentional? What if they're deliberately trying to mask their true positions, their actual numbers, or their tactical intentions? With 197 ships against our 3,000? Kithra's laughter echoed through the bridge like breaking crystal. Even if they had twice that number hiding in sensor shadows somewhere in this system, they would still be hopelessly outmatched by a factor of 7 to 1. Our individual ships outclass theirs by orders of magnitude. No, Vextar, this is simply human inefficiency on full display, the chaotic flailing of a dying species that never learned proper military discipline." The fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, past the asteroid belt where ancient human mining operations had left scars in the rock. The human ships continued their erratic behavior, some accelerating away from the advancing Zephyrian force as if fleeing in panic, others moving on seemingly random vectors that served no apparent strategic purpose, and still others simply drifting as if their crews had abandoned all hope. "They're not even attempting to form a defensive line," observed another bridge officer, its voice tinged with professional bewilderment. 43 ships have actually left Earth's immediate sphere of influence entirely, heading toward the outer system. By all tactical analysis, they should be concentrating their forces to maximize their defensive potential. "Desertion and panic," Kithra declared with the authority of someone who had witnessed this pattern 47 times before. When faced with inevitable defeat, most species revert to their basest survival instincts. Individual self-preservation overrides species loyalty. Every conquered world has demonstrated this same phenomenon in the final hours before submission. The general activated the fleet-wide communication system, its voice carrying to every ship in the armada. All units, maintain formation integrity. We will demonstrate to these scattered prey exactly why unity and coordination triumph over chaos and cowardice every time. Prepare to engage when we reach optimal firing range. But as the Zephyrian fleet closed to within long-range weapons distance of the nearest human ships, something completely unprecedented happened. Instead of trying to fight or flee in organized panic, the human vessels began broadcasting on every available frequency simultaneously. General, the communications officer reported, its voice uncertain for the first time in its career, the humans are transmitting music. Music! Kithra's mandibles snapped in irritation. Classical compositions, popular songs, children's lullabies, and what appears to be something called rock opera. All on different frequencies, creating a cacophony of human cultural noise across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Throughout the Zephyrian fleet, confusion rippled through the ranks like a virus. In 47 previous conquests, no species had ever responded to imminent destruction by playing music. The behavior was so unprecedented that several ship commanders actually paused their advance to request clarification from the flagship. Ignore their pathetic noise, Kithra ordered, but for the first time, there was a slight hesitation in its voice. Begin the attack. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with the devastating precision that had reduced 47 worlds to submission. 3,000 warships discharged their weapons in perfect synchronization, creating a symphony of coherent energy that lit up the void like a newborn star. Each beam was calculated down to the joule, targeted with mathematical perfection to disable rather than destroy. The Empire had learned that intact vessels yielded more valuable intelligence than debris fields. But when the brilliant lances of energy reached their predetermined coordinates, something that defied every law of physics, tactics, and common sense occurred. The human ships weren't there anymore. Report! Kithra's voice cut through the sudden chaos on the bridge like a blade, its usual mechanical composure cracking for the first time in its 3-century military career. General, the sensor operator's voice carried a note of bewilderment that would have been unthinkable moments before. Our targeting computers achieved perfect lock onto the human vessels. All calculations were verified through secondary and tertiary systems. But the energy signatures we're detecting don't match their physical positions. The ships appear to be elsewhere entirely. On the main tactical display, the situation resembled a fever dream more than a military engagement. The Zephyrian targeting systems showed human ships in specific locations, their sensor ghosts bright and clear, but the actual physical vessels were scattered across completely different coordinates, some several thousand kilometers away from where their electronic signatures appeared to be broadcasting from. The electromagnetic interference from the humans' chaotic power systems had created a perfect fog of war, turning space itself into a hall of mirrors where nothing was where it seemed to be. Every sensor reading was corrupted, every targeting solution rendered meaningless by the storm of random electromagnetic noise. Recalibrate all sensor arrays immediately, Kithra ordered, its 4 arms moving in sharp, agitated gestures that betrayed its growing frustration. We've tried multiple recalibrations, General, reported the chief sensor technician, a veteran of 23 conquest campaigns who had never encountered anything like this. The humans' random energy outputs are creating false echoes, phantom signatures, and sensor shadows throughout our entire detection grid. We can detect their presence, but we cannot accurately determine their positions, their velocities, or their intentions. For the first time in its distinguished military career, High General Kithra experienced something completely alien to Zephyrian nature: genuine uncertainty. The Empire's entire military doctrine was built on perfect information, flawless coordination, and overwhelming technological superiority. But the humans had somehow weaponized their own technological inferiority, turning their weaknesses into a bizarre form of strength. The human ships continued their seemingly random movements, but now a new pattern began to emerge, not in their positioning, which remained chaotic, but in their timing. While the Zephyrian fleet struggled to lock onto targets that flickered in and out of existence like ghosts, small groups of human vessels began making brief, seemingly suicidal attacks on the outer edges of the alien formation. Incoming attack craft called out a defensive coordinator, its voice tight with professional frustration. 12 human ships approaching Vector 779. Estimated time to contact 4 minutes. The Zephyrian ships in that sector turned to engage with practiced efficiency, their superior weapons easily outranging the primitive human craft. But as they opened fire, the attacking ships scattered in all directions like startled fish, their pilots flying patterns that violated every principle of military logic, physics, and apparently sanity itself. One human ship, a converted mining vessel barely larger than a Zephyrian shuttle, actually flew directly through its own allies' weapons fire, somehow avoiding both friendly fire and enemy targeting beams through a combination of reckless piloting and sheer impossible luck. Another made a 90-degree turn at full acceleration that should have turned its crew into paste against the bulkheads. A third began spinning end over end while continuing to fire its weapons in a display of aerial acrobatics that defied comprehension. "They're flying like madmen," observed Commander Vextar, its compound eyes tracking the erratic flight patterns with something approaching academic fascination. "Because they are mad," Kithara replied, but there was significantly less certainty in its voice than there had been an hour before. The comfortable predictability of conquest was evaporating like morning mist. The human attacks inflicted minimal physical damage. Their weapons were decades behind Zephyrian defensive technology, but they had an unexpected and deeply troubling effect. Each seemingly random assault forced entire sections of the Zephyrian fleet to break formation to respond to threats that appeared and vanished like hallucinations. The perfect geometric order that had conquered 47 worlds began to fracture as ship commanders tried to adapt to an enemy that refused to behave according to any recognizable pattern. "General," reported the fleet coordinator, its voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic, "multiple squadron leaders are requesting permission to pursue fleeing human vessels. The random attacks are drawing our ships out of assigned positions, and some commanders are having severe difficulty maintaining tactical coherence while responding to threats from multiple vectors simultaneously." "Negative," Kithara snapped. "All units will maintain formation integrity." "But sir, the humans are systematically disrupting our battle line with these random attacks. Some squadron commanders report that their crews are becoming confused by the enemy's unpredictable behavior patterns." Kithara studied the tactical display with growing alarm. The human ships were indeed like gnats buzzing around a giant, individually harmless, but collectively creating a form of psychological warfare that no Zephyrian military academy had ever anticipated. Every time the alien fleet tried to swat one of the pestering craft, it flew away in an unpredictable direction, often leading pursuing ships away from their assigned positions and further fragmenting the formation. "All units," Kithara broadcast across the fleet-wide communication network, "ignore the harassment attacks. Focus on the primary objective, Earth itself." But as the fleet continued its advance toward the blue planet hanging in the void like a fragile jewel, the harassment attacks intensified exponentially. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts in the sensor static, striking quickly with weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate Zephyrian shields, then vanishing into the electromagnetic chaos they had created around themselves. More troubling still, the attacks were becoming more coordinated without becoming more predictable. Not in any way that followed recognizable military doctrine, but with an organic randomness that was somehow more effective than traditional tactics, like a swarm of insects operating on instinct rather than intelligence, yet achieving results that no planned strategy could match. "General," Vextar said quietly, its voice carrying a note of professional respect that hadn't been there before, "I'm beginning to think the humans know exactly what they're doing." As the Zephyrian fleet pushed deeper toward Earth, High General Kithara realized with growing alarm that its perfect formation was slowly disintegrating like a precisely crafted crystal struck by chaotic vibrations. Not from external damage, the human attacks had been more psychologically disturbing than physically destructive, but from the constant, relentless need to adapt to an enemy that seemed to operate outside the very concept of military logic. The bridge, which had maintained cathedral-like silence for the first hours of the engagement, now buzzed with nervous energy as officers struggled to process data that made no sense according to their training. Displays flickered with contradictory information. Communication channels crackled with confused reports from squadron leaders, and the perfect harmony of Zephyrian coordination began to show stress fractures. "Fleet status report," Kythera demanded. Its four arms held rigidly at its sides in an attempt to project confidence it no longer felt. "General," the fleet coordinator responded, its voice carrying undertones of professional bewilderment. "We've maintained 67% tactical cohesion across all battle groups. Multiple units have been drawn out of assigned positions while responding to human harassment tactics. The scattered, seemingly random attacks are preventing us from maintaining proper formation integrity, and several squadron commanders report difficulty implementing standard tactical responses." 67%. The number struck Kythera like a physical blow. In any previous campaign against the 47 conquered worlds, even 90% cohesion would have been considered barely acceptable for an engagement of this magnitude. The Zephyrian military machine functioned on perfect coordination. Every ship in its exact predetermined position, every crew member following precise protocols established over centuries of conquest, every tactical element operating in harmony with mathematical precision. But the humans seemed to operate on an entirely different principle that defied analysis. Their ships moved like a swarm of insects following pheromone trails invisible to alien sensors, each vessel following its own apparently random path, while somehow contributing to a larger pattern that grew more complex and threatening with each passing moment. "Sir," called out the sensor operator, its compound eyes reflecting the chaotic light from multiple displays. "We're detecting significant new movement patterns from the human fleet. They appear to be converging on a specific coordinate." Kythera's attention snapped to the tactical display like a predator sensing wounded prey. The scattered human ships, which had been flying seemingly random patterns for hours while tormenting the Zephyrian formation, were beginning to move in roughly the same direction. Not in any recognizable formation, they still maintained their maddening chaotic positioning relative to each other, but with a shared purpose that was becoming increasingly, ominously clear. They were all heading for the same region of space, like pieces of a vast, incomprehensible puzzle finally clicking into place. "What's in that sector?" Kythera asked, its mechanical voice betraying the first hints of genuine concern. "Nothing, General," came the response from the navigation officer. "Empty space between Earth and Mars. No strategic installations, no defensive positions, no gravitational anomalies, no asteroid fields that could provide cover. According to all tactical analysis, that region has no military value whatsoever." The sensor operator's voice suddenly cracked with alarm. "General, I'm detecting massive energy buildup signatures in that region. The humans appear to have been seeding it with something during their apparent retreat maneuvers." "Seeding it with what?" Kythera's mandibles clicked with sharp, staccato bursts of anxiety. "I don't know, sir. The electromagnetic interference from their ships has been masking whatever they deployed there throughout the entire engagement. But the energy signatures are enormous, far beyond anything their individual ships should be capable of generating. It's as if they've been assembling something piece by piece while we were focused on their harassment attacks." Kythera felt something it had never experienced before in 3 centuries of military service. The cold, creeping touch of genuine strategic concern. The humans' seemingly random movements hadn't been random at all. They had been positioning assets, laying an elaborate trap while appearing to flee in disorganized panic. Every chaotic maneuver, every seemingly suicidal attack, every apparent retreat had been part of a larger design that the Zephyrian military mind simply couldn't comprehend until it was too late. "All ships, halt advance immediately," Kythera ordered, its voice cutting through the bridge chatter like a laser through vacuum. "Emergency defensive formation, now." But as the command went out across the fleet's communication network, the Zephyrian ships discovered something deeply alarming. Hours of chasing scattered human vessels across vast areas of space had left them spread across a volume of space larger than most star systems. The perfect geometric formation that was the foundation of all Zephyrian military doctrine was impossible to restore quickly, and worse still, The humans had somehow positioned themselves throughout the Zephyrian fleet like antibodies infiltrating a host organism. "General," Commander Vextar reported, its voice tight with a tension that bordered on panic. "We have human ships interspersed throughout our formation at multiple levels. They're not attacking our vessels directly, just flying among us like they belong here." On the main tactical display, the situation looked like something from a fever dream. Dozens of human vessels had somehow infiltrated the Zephyrian fleet during the chaos of the harassment attacks, weaving between the much larger alien ships like minnows swimming fearlessly among whales. They were positioned too close for the Zephyrian vessels to use their main weapons without risking catastrophic friendly fire incidents, and their constant movement made them nearly impossible to target with precision weapons. "How did they penetrate our formation?" Kythera demanded, its four arms now moving in agitated patterns that betrayed its growing desperation. "They never left, General," Vextar replied with something approaching horrified admiration. "While we were focused on the harassment attacks at our perimeter, coordinating responses to threats at the edges of our formation, these ships maintained position within our fleet structure. The sensor interference made us lose track of them entirely. We literally forgot they were there." The clicking sound that emerged from Kythera's mandibles was no longer the confident laughter of a conqueror, but the brittle noise of breaking ceramic. And then, as if responding to some invisible signal transmitted on frequencies the Zephyrians couldn't detect, every human ship in the solar system suddenly changed course with unified precision. No longer chaotic, no longer random, no longer appearing to flee in panic, they moved with deadly, coordinated purpose toward the region of space their comrades had been secretly preparing. "General!" The sensor operator's voice cracked with genuine alarm. "Energy cascade detected throughout the target zone. Whatever the humans planted out there, it's going active right now." The space between Earth and Mars suddenly blazed with light so intense that automatic filters across the Zephyrian fleet activated to protect optical sensors from permanent damage. What erupted in that seemingly empty region of space was not mere fire or explosion, but something far more terrifying, the birth of an artificial star powered by humanity's desperate ingenuity. What the Zephyrians had dismissed as random human behavior crystallized into its true, horrifying purpose. For hours, while appearing to flee in chaotic panic, human ships had been deploying thousands upon thousands of tiny objects throughout that region. Objects so small and electromagnetically masked by the chaos of their own ship emissions that they had registered as space debris, cosmic dust, or hadn't registered at all on the sophisticated Zephyrian sensor networks. They weren't debris. They were seeds of destruction beyond anything the Empire had encountered in 47 conquests. "Quantum mines," breathed Commander Vextar as the tactical display lit up like a festival of death. Hundreds of energy signatures appearing simultaneously across a volume of space larger than most inhabited worlds. "Dear ancestors, they've sown the entire sector with quantum mines. But these weren't ordinary explosive devices designed to damage hull plating or disable engines. As the first mines detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence, they created localized tears in the fabric of spacetime itself, microscopic rifts that expanded and connected to each other like neurons forming a vast, malevolent brain. The effect cascaded through the mine field with terrifying precision, each detonation triggering others in a chain reaction that defied conventional physics and challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about warfare. Space itself began to warp and twist like molten glass, creating gravity wells that pulled at matter with impossible force and dimensional rifts that seemed to lead to somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark and hungry. "General," the sensor operator reported, its voice filled with something approaching existential panic. "The quantum cascade is creating massive spatial distortions throughout the entire region. Gravitational fields are fluctuating wildly, space-time curvature is exceeding all known parameters, and it's pulling our ships toward the detonation zone like debris being sucked into a black hole." High General Kythera watched in growing horror as the perfect trap revealed itself with devastating clarity. The human dandelion formation hadn't been random chaos born of desperation. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to scatter quantum mines throughout a massive area of space while appearing to flee in disorganized panic. Every seemingly random maneuver had positioned another piece of the puzzle. The electromagnetic interference from their ships hadn't been incompetence. It had been sophisticated camouflage for the largest military deception operation in recorded galactic history. And now, like seeds finally sprouting after a long winter, the quantum mines were blooming into flowers of pure destruction. All ships, emergency retreat, Kithara commanded, its voice cutting through the bridge chaos with desperate authority. Maximum power to engines. Break away from the distortion field immediately. But it was too late. The quantum mines weren't just creating random explosions. They were systematically warping the fundamental structure of space itself, creating gravity wells and dimensional rifts that reached out like invisible tentacles to grab onto anything with sufficient mass. The massive Zephyrian battle cruisers, pride of the Empire and symbols of technological superiority, were being pulled inexorably toward the growing anomaly like insects caught in a cosmic spider's web. "We can't break free," reported ship after ship across the fleet communication network, their voices carrying notes of panic that would have been unthinkable hours before. "The spatial distortions are too strong. Engines at maximum power, but we're still being pulled toward the cascade zone. Use emergency power protocols. Overload the antimatter drives. Burn out the engines if necessary." Kithara's commands grew increasingly desperate as more ships reported their inability to escape the quantum trap. Some ships managed to tear themselves free from the invisible web of warped spacetime, but at a catastrophic cost. Emergency power burns left them crippled and drifting helplessly as their crews struggled to restore basic life support systems. Others weren't so fortunate. They disappeared entirely into the expanding rifts, their final transmissions cut off midward as they vanished into dimensional spaces that existed outside normal reality. And through it all, like masters of a storm they had summoned, the human ships danced along the edges of the chaos with impossible grace. Their smaller mass and more maneuverable designs allowed them to ride the currents of distorted space like surfers on waves of twisted physics, using the quantum field's own exotic energy to accelerate their primitive vessels beyond anything their conventional engines should have been capable of achieving. "They're using the mind field as a propulsion system," Vextar observed with something approaching professional admiration mixed with existential terror. "The quantum distortions are accelerating their ships to incredible velocities. They've turned their own weapon into a tactical advantage." Kithara's compound eyes tracked the human vessels as they swept around the edge of the expanding anomaly with predatory intent. No longer scattered, no longer chaotic, no longer appearing weak and desperate, they moved with deadly purpose, straight toward the crippled Zephyrian ships that had been caught in the quantum web. "Sir," called out the communications officer, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Kithara ordered, dreading what new horror the humans might reveal. Commander Elena Rodriguez appeared on the screen, but this time she wasn't in the underground bunker on Earth. She was on the bridge of a warship racing through space, and behind her, Kithara could see the blue-white glow of quantum fire reflected in her eyes like the light of a newborn god. "General Kithara," Rodriguez said with calm satisfaction, "I hope you're beginning to understand our strategy now." "You've destroyed half my fleet with some kind of experimental weapon," Kithara replied, its mandibles clicking with rage and barely controlled fear. "But you cannot possibly have enough of those quantum devices to—" "We don't need more mines," Rodriguez interrupted with a smile that chilled the alien general to its core. "The quantum cascade is self-sustaining now. Every ship it consumes adds to its mass and energy, making it stronger and more sophisticated. Your own vessels are feeding the anomaly, General. You're not just losing ships, you're making our weapon more powerful with every vessel that gets caught." The terrible truth of it hit Kithara like a physical blow to its thorax. The humans hadn't just built a weapon of mass destruction. They had built a trap that grew stronger with each victim it claimed, a monster that fed on the very thing it was designed to destroy. "But that's not the interesting part," Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying notes of scientific fascination mixed with grim satisfaction. "The interesting part is what happens next." The quantum anomaly had grown to encompass nearly a quarter of the space between Earth and Mars, its hungry tendrils of distorted spacetime reaching out like the arms of some cosmic predator that existed between dimensions. The very fabric of reality writhed and twisted within its boundaries, creating impossible geometries that hurt to perceive and gravitational fields that pulled matter into configurations that shouldn't have been able to exist. More than half the Zephyrian fleet was gone, either consumed entirely by the dimensional rifts or crippled beyond repair by their desperate attempts to escape the quantum web. Proud warships that had reduced entire worlds to submission now drifted powerlessly through space, their crews trapped in vessels that had become technological coffins. But High General Kythera still commanded over 1,000 functional ships, and the Empire had not conquered 47 worlds by surrendering at the first major setback. Even facing an enemy that seemed to defy the very laws of physics, Zephyrian military doctrine demanded adaptation and counterattack. All remaining vessels, Kythera broadcast across the fleet's emergency communication network, its voice cutting through the chaos with forced confidence. Establish defensive perimeter around the anomaly zone. The humans cannot maintain this quantum cascade indefinitely. The energy requirements are astronomically massive. When their experimental weapon burns itself out and collapses, we will finish what we came here to accomplish. It was sound military logic based on centuries of successful campaigns. No weapon system could operate indefinitely without a power source, and the quantum cascade was consuming energy at rates that exceeded the output of entire star systems. When it finally collapsed under its own impossible demands, the surviving Zephyrian forces would still outnumber the human fleet by more than 5-1, and superior alien technology would reassert its dominance. Commander Rodriguez seemed to read Kythera's tactical analysis from across the void. Her image on the communication screen carried an expression of scientific fascination mixed with grim amusement. "You're thinking this quantum cascade is temporary," she said from her ship's bridge, where displays showed readings that would have been incomprehensible to any Zephyrian scientist. "You're calculating energy consumption rates and concluding that we can't sustain this level of space-time manipulation indefinitely. You're thinking you can wait us out and then resume your conquest. Your weapon is impressive beyond anything we've encountered," Kythera admitted with grudging professional respect, "but ultimately unsustainable. When it fails due to energy depletion, your scattered fleet will be easy prey for our remaining forces." "That's where you're wrong about two fundamental things," Rodriguez replied, her smile carrying notes of satisfaction that chilled the alien general's compound hearts. "First, our fleet isn't scattered anymore." She was absolutely right. While the Zephyrians had been focused entirely on the expanding quantum anomaly and their own desperate survival, the human ships had regrouped into tight, coordinated formations. But these weren't the rigid geometric patterns favored by the Empire. These were organic shapes that flowed and shifted like living organisms, formations that seemed to breathe and adapt with an intelligence all their own. "And second," Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying undertones of scientific triumph, "the weapon isn't failing or burning out. It's evolving into something we never quite expected." As if summoned by her words, the quantum anomaly began to undergo a transformation that defied every law of physics the Zephyrians thought they understood. Instead of the chaotic maelstrom of torn spacetime it had been, the dimensional rifts started to align themselves into regular, almost crystalline patterns. The random energy discharges that had been lashing out in all directions became focused beams of coherent force. The expanding cascade began to contract and stabilize into something that resembled a vast, impossible flower made of pure mathematics and controlled destruction. "What are you doing to it?" Kythera demanded, its voice carrying notes of horror that its military training couldn't suppress. "We're not doing anything," Rodriguez said with a smile that seemed to illuminate her entire face. "We built the quantum mines to be self-organizing using principles of emergent complexity. Chaos was just the first phase, the initial explosion that created the raw materials. Now comes the truly interesting part: spontaneous order emerging from apparent randomness." The implications hit Kythera like the shockwave from a collapsing star. The humans hadn't just created a weapon of mass destruction that violated known physics. They had created an artificial intelligence that fed on the fundamental forces of reality itself, growing stronger and more sophisticated with each ship it consumed, learning and adapting with every piece of technology it analyzed. And now it was demonstrating that it had learned enough. The quantum entity, for that was what it had become, something that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names, began to extend pseudopods of controlled spacetime toward the remaining Zephyrian vessels. But these weren't the chaotic rifts that had torn through the fleet earlier. These were precise, surgical instruments that could pluck a single ship out of formation without disturbing its neighbors, manipulate matter at the molecular level, and transport objects across impossible distances through folded space. Impossible, Vextar whispered, its voice filled with the kind of awe reserved for witnessing the birth of gods. They've created a sentient weapon that operates outside normal physics. Not sentient in the way you're thinking, Rodriguez corrected through the communication link, her voice carrying the patience of a teacher explaining advanced concepts to a struggling student. But definitely learning, definitely adapting, definitely growing more sophisticated with every moment. Every Zephyrian ship it analyzed gave it more data about your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses, and your psychology. It's been studying you while you thought you were fighting a conventional battle. One by one, Zephyrian vessels began to disappear into the quantum entity's grasp. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but carefully transported elsewhere to pocket dimensions where their crews would be kept in perfect stasis until humanity decided what to do with them. The artificial intelligence had learned enough about Zephyrian biology and technology to neutralize threats without causing unnecessary death. "You're not killing us," Kythera observed with something approaching grateful bewilderment. "We're not monsters, General," Rodriguez replied, her expression softening slightly. "We're just very, very good at defending our home and very, very creative when it comes to solving problems that seem impossible." The remaining Zephyrian ships tried everything their military doctrine suggested: emergency jumps to hyperspace, maximum acceleration burns to escape the entity's reach, even ramming attacks against the quantum anomaly itself. Nothing worked. The artificial intelligence adapted to each tactic faster than the Empire's finest strategists could devise new ones, learning from each attempt and developing countermeasures in real time. Within an hour, only Kythera's flagship remained, held motionless in the grip of controlled spacetime, while the quantum entity studied it with alien curiosity that felt almost gentle. "General Kythera," Rodriguez said, her voice now coming from speakers throughout the Zephyrian bridge as the entity established direct communication links. "You have a choice. You can surrender your remaining forces and return to the Empire with a message that might prevent further bloodshed, or you can join your fleet in dimensional storage until we figure out what to do with 3,000 warships and their crews." Kythera's mandibles clicked one final time, not with the laughter of a conqueror, but with something approaching professional respect mixed with existential awe. "Commander Rodriguez," the alien general said, its voice carrying decades of military experience and the wisdom that came from witnessing something truly unprecedented. "I have conquered 47 worlds across 3 centuries of service. I have studied the military doctrines of over 100 different species. Never, in all my experience, have I encountered anything like what you have accomplished here today. That's because you were fighting the wrong war entirely," Rodriguez replied with gentle firmness. "You thought this was about superior technology, better tactics, perfect formations, and overwhelming force. But humans don't fight wars like that when our survival is at stake. We fight wars with whatever works, even if it looks like chaos to everyone else. Especially if it looks like chaos to everyone else." "And what message would you have me carry to the Empire?" Kythera asked. Rodriguez appeared on the main screen one final time, her image overlaid with the blue-white glow of controlled quantum fire that had become humanity's new guardian. "Tell them that humanity embraces chaos not because we're weak or undisciplined, but because chaos is another kind of strength that most species never learn to harness. Tell them that we don't fight wars the way other species do. We solve problems, and every problem has a solution if you're creative enough to find it. And tell them that any empire that thinks conquest is inevitable clearly hasn't met the right humans yet."